You're listening to the Second Look Podcast, where we take a closer look at what we're learning each Sunday at Connection Church to help you grow in your walk with Christ. Here are your hosts, Pastor Joe Terreri and Pastor Dan DeRochers.
Welcome to the Second Look. My name is Dan.
And I am still Joe.
And we are back, baby. We're here talking.
What a hiatus.
Yes, a one full week.
One full week.
We're here talking about how to bless the world with our podcast. But first, hey, Joe.
Hello, Dan.
Not many people know, Joe, that all you do is serve.
No, very few people realize that's really, that's what they're going to put on my tombstone. I can feel it.
Joe Terreri, 1981 dash question mark
2086
quote. All he did was serve.
Yes,
Joe. What are some ways that you
this is
serve your family?
I am not talking about that.
This is really just John Myers fodder.
Yeah, this is really just. Yeah, Dan. I would say that we all have different gifts, and
true.
so I like to serve people with the gifts that I have. So I'll just leave it at that. They're very few and far between, but whatever gifts I have, I like to serve others with them.
We did have a conversation earlier this year when we were talking about our missions trips, and we were talking about maybe the possibility of you going to Belgium.
Yes.
And I remember having this conversation about, well, this is a helping trip. This is a serving trip.
This is a trip where we're going to do actual work. Not interested. That's not true. No, there was a possibility I could teach or help people, and then it just came back that we're just going to be painting and vacuuming
and I'm doing concrete work which you are uniquely gifted to do. Obviously,
I'm good. I'll stay here and hold the fort down.
That's right.
I'll talk on the weekends.
And yet here we are talking about how to bless the world.
Yes.
Right? And
are you insinuating that I don't have any actual gifts?
No, I am insinuating that you are using gifts that are not the ones that I like to make fun of.
Yes.
To be a blessing to other people.
Yes. Okay. All right. Just as long as
one of those
clear.
things being talking to them, which you didn't do yesterday.
No.
But you did bless us with your presence yesterday during the 10 a.m. service.
This is ridiculous. Yes, Dan, I did come to Connection Church, and I want to say a couple things about this is actually important. I've come to three conclusions after just attending a service yesterday at Connection Church. So I came with my family. We all rode in the same car. We all showed up 5 minutes before service began. Wow. And then we went to the service, and then we went out to lunch. And I'm like, wow, Sundays are awesome.
Pastors do not get to do that.
No, I was like, this is incredible. But I want to say a few things about my experience at Connection Church yesterday, just as an attendee, which truly cannot actually happen. But I tried. Number one, the parking lot is a difficult place. Yes. I had no idea how packed and weird the parking lot gets during. We came to the 10 a.m. service, and I'm like, wow, this feels like as soon as you pull in our parking lot, it's like purgatory. Like you just what do I have to do to get out of here? Right. Yeah, I'm just stuck here. By the way, I don't believe in purgatory. Anyway, but yes,
outside of our parking lot.
Yeah, outside of our parking lot. So the parking lot, that's a challenging situation. The second thing I'd like to say is our service is shockingly fast. I got there, we sang, beautiful worship time. Andrew preached, great message, and then I was like, wow, that's it? And I walked out, and I said to Cheryl, it is not a big commitment to come to church. You have no excuse, everybody. You're literally in and out in 75 minutes, and that includes a few conversations after church and finding a parking space before church. You can come to church. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
It's so brief. And I'm like, this can't just be what it means to be a Christian. We can't just call that Christianity. So anyway, coming to church, not hard. Just want everyone to know that, except the parking lot. And the third thing I thought of, and this is with all genuineness and sincerity, is I really was so ministered to at our church. And this is going to sound like I have to say this, but I don't actually have to say this. If I wasn't the pastor of this church, I'd come to this church. I was so blessed by the people. I was so blessed by the worship time. I was so blessed by the biblical preaching. Here I am listening to a sermon on Micah. I've heard, that was my first sermon to hear on Micah. And the way that my kids were cared for. Ezra was absolutely blowing up the pre-K room with bad behavior. And so, Heidi Fisher, like serving us, Marie Anders texting Cheryl during service, Ezra's not doing well, what can we do to help him? And I'm thinking, we are getting so well served. And I know it's not just us.
Right. No, it's a fact.
It's not just our kids blowing up the pre-K room, but just an awesome time. And just all the people who serve. Because here's the thing, Dan, when you just come to church, it's so easy to forget all the people behind the scenes who aren't just showing up for 75 minutes.
Yep.
They're working with our kids. They're running sound. They're, our worship team's here for, 6 hours. Just the quality of our services and the coffee. It just, I just want to say, that just doesn't happen on accident.
Yeah.
It's because God's people are activated into ministry, and it just blesses people. And then I think about those people who they come to a service and then they serve at a service. It's like, man, just the sacrifices and the way that people lay their lives down and serve with their gifts is such a huge blessing. And just to be on the other side of that yesterday, I was just like, man, God is so faithful and he's so good. And I walked out of church yesterday to go to the Texas Roadhouse, just very grateful for how God is working and how just the wonderful people at our church. And I mean that from the depth of my heart.
No, it's true, Joe. We are so blessed to serve here, to be here, to be part of this community, to be part of what God's doing in the community. I don't know why God chooses to use us.
Yep.
But what a blessing that we get to.
Yeah, and just the joy that I saw on people's faces and the way we were welcomed. I mean, and listen, I know I'm the pastor, but even I wasn't the only one getting welcomed like that.
Right.
So just grateful to God for what he's doing. And then, obviously he's pleased with us because our building got struck with lightning right before the 11:30 service. So that was good too.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah. All right, we should probably talk about the message
What
at
a
some
blessing
point.
that was.
Yeah.
Segue.
Yeah.
But what God's doing here at Connection Church, it is impacting individuals.
Yes.
But our vision is beyond North Coventry, beyond Pottstown.
Yeah.
It really is to the ends of the earth. And when we look at the book of Micah, when we look at God's promise to Abram that he would bless all nations, of course, fulfilled with Jesus, fulfilled in Christianity, all of these different lines through the gospel that God is continuing to bless all nations. We see that happening not just in the life of Abraham being encouraged strongly through the prophet Micah, but also continuing today through Connection Church.
Yeah. Well, and I think I love the premise of the message yesterday, how Andrew set up the whole idea that is your life a blessing or is it a curse?
Yeah.
And the idea that we are supposed to be people who leave our mark on the world through blessing and through loving people, through serving people. And listen, I would say there are times as a Christian where we are not a blessing and it's our fault. And then there's times where we are not perceived to be a blessing because of things we believe and hold to. And, and so we need to be careful that to be a blessing doesn't always mean to be liked. Because sometimes we can actually be a blessing when we're not received. And so that's part of being hated. But then sometimes as God's people, we're not actually interested in blessing the world. We end up just like the world in our quest for power and money. And so we need to just be aware. And then, of course, we're sinners, and sinful people sometimes do cause cursing with the way that we live our lives. And so, but as individuals, as a church, we want Connection Church, and I know this about my life. I want my life, you want your life. We do really want, when we talk about what do we want people to remember us for, that our lives really were a blessing. And I love that Andrew brought out in the text through Micah that one of the ways we're a blessing is through our obedience to the Lord. We actually bless others through an obedient life.
Yeah, that's so true. And when we remember that God has blessed us.
Yes.
That's one thing that I took away from.
Oh, that was my favorite part of the message yesterday.
That we comprehend how we've been blessed, right? Because we are a blessing to the world when we understand how much we've been blessed.
Yeah.
And I don't know, especially in hard times in life, I think it's challenging, and we don't always actively remember how blessed we are. And we talk a lot about forgetfulness in our sermons, on this podcast. We talk a lot about how forgetful humans are, how leaky our brains are to not remember, and in this case, to not remember the blessings of God. Why do you think we don't remember that in good times and in bad?
Because I think it's really easy. I would say, especially in our culture of instant gratification, and I don't think it's just our culture's problem. I mean, the whole story of Israel is they forgot. Right. Like, they just forgot about God and all the ways that he had worked in them and through them. But I think that we are the "what have you done for me lately" people.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of the first thing on our mind. And I think there's something about our sinful nature that we are constantly in this space of just kind of sliding into discontent without realizing it. And, this can happen in our relationships. This can happen with our relationship with God. This can happen just in our view of the world. And it is so easy to always be looking at life through the lens of, I'm getting a raw deal.
Yeah.
Or I'm the victim. Or, or envy. Envy's a big one. Like, why is that person having a better life?
Yeah.
So all of those things, envy and jealousy and discontent and, the world's such a dark and broken place, which it is. People are always letting me down. High expectations. All those things set us up to forget how God has blessed us. And I love how Andrew used that word, recount.
Yes.
How God has blessed you. Because honestly, when he first said that, I was like, that's kind of a clunky sermon point. That's my problem when I listen to messages. I'm like, that's a clunky sermon point. But then he said in his message, I use the word recount because we literally need to tell ourselves the story about how God has blessed us. And a light bulb went on in my spirit in that moment. And I'm like, that is so good.
Yeah.
Because here's how we get discontent. We tell ourselves the wrong story.
Yeah.
We're telling ourselves the story about how people have let us down, about how we don't have what we think we should have, how we're getting, a raw deal. And it's like, yeah. And what happens when that happens? When you tell yourself that story, you get entitled.
Yeah.
And what happens when entitlement sets in? Gratefulness evaporates.
Yep.
And so even my wife said to me last night, right before we're going to bed, she goes, "What are your 3 things today?" And I'm like, and I knew exactly what she meant. What are the 3 things we're grateful for today?
Yeah.
And we had a great day yesterday. Those 3 things were easy to name. And so I just think what a beautiful spiritual discipline. I don't even want to call it a habit, like a spiritual discipline to celebrate what God is doing in our lives.
And it's not just to ourselves, right? Part of it is telling ourselves that story to intentionally remember. But another thing that Andrew brought out is it's recounting the story to other people.
Yes.
When we hold stuff in, and whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, whether you share freely about your life or not, sharing our story with others, especially as God is blessing us or has blessed us, not in a prideful way, not to say, look at me and this wonderful thing, but in order to share and remember, but also to build other people's faith as we share the way that God's blessed us. And that can be through good times or through bad times, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think there's something really healthy about walking through valleys and practicing gratitude.
Yeah.
We've had to do that a lot this year, a whole lot. Cheryl and I just got to go away this last week for a few days to Alexandria, Virginia. We were celebrating our 20th wedding anniversary. And to be just perfectly blunt, like, we had a great time, but there's a part of me where it's like, hey, we want to do something a little bit bigger for our 20th wedding anniversary than drive to Virginia and, go to the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. Like, it was great, but we were hoping for something more tropical, but we just couldn't go away that long. Right. What we're walking through with Lucy and all that stuff. And even that, like, even just training my own heart. And Cheryl doesn't, she's just eternally grateful. She's just way less entitled than I am. But just to even say, like, hey, like, God has been so good to us even in this tough year. And my wife said to me when we were just kind of like reminiscing, she goes, I think I've grown the most spiritually this year. And I'm like thinking to myself, like, God, like, how good is God that in easily the hardest year of her life and our lives as a family, we're coming to the end of it. And she's saying, I am closer, like I've never grown in 1 year as much as I have. Wow. And the humility that's there and the godliness that I see in her, I just praise God for that. I just praise God for his wisdom in taking something like a really difficult year, lots of hospitals, lots of appointments, lots of tough moments.
Yeah.
And just to look back and be like, I don't want to go through that again, but how God has blessed us with himself, with depth of relationship with one another, with the ways that people have provided meals and loved our family in practical ways. You just stand back and you're like, God, you are awesome. So it is in those tough times where gratitude can rise sometimes more than when everything's up and to the right.
Wow. That's so good, Joe. And I'm just getting this imagery as you're talking about that when we are seeing the hand of God in our lives through the mountains and valleys, it's almost like God levels things out. When we're trusting in him, when we're looking to him, the valleys don't seem so low because he's taking the brunt of some of those things. And what a beautiful example of Cheryl looking at the blessing of drawing close to the Lord in those tough moments. And in the mountain peaks, all the credit goes to him.
Amen.
Right? So it's almost like our own role in our life is diminished. God takes the credit for the peaks and he takes the hit in the valleys.
And he's with us in them.
It's incredible.
Yeah. And it's like when everything's going so well in our lives, which the older I get, the more I'm like, is there ever a time where everything's going great?
Right.
No.
Right.
But there is something about rehearsing the goodness of God in every season of life that keeps our heart alive, fresh, and awake to who God is, to our need for him. And that is actually a source of deep and abiding joy in our life. Because when joy is missing, and I'm not talking about if you have clinical depression or, but when joy is missing, and I'm not talking, maybe you just lost someone super close to you, just talk about it in general. When joy is missing, it could be that the gratitude is missing as well. And I think there is a correlation between practicing, rehearsing, recounting God's blessings in our life and the increase of joy.
Yeah,
those two things go together.
So, you mentioned the three things, right? What are your three things that you're grateful for today? Are there any other things that you practice to keep the joy up and to keep recounting God's blessings?
I think when I feel, because I actually have a lot of feelings as a person, and when I kind of feel stressed about whether it's we have a lot of bills coming up, or we have a lot of unexpected things happening, or when I feel like, oh man, why does life have to be so hard in this one area, or when I get into the comparison game, I actually feel like for me, it's super easy for me to get into those spaces, and so something that I just know needs to happen in me when I get in those places, when I don't know how else to describe it other than self-pity. That's where the gratitude is actually needing to be the most prevalent.
Yeah.
And so listen, I think I go to the Psalms, I go to prayer, I stop right where I am and I talk out loud to the Lord and I specifically thank him for things in my life. I thank him for the people in my life. I thank him for what he's doing in my life. So you have to take a step back and you have to kind of get out of the muck and the mire of woe is me.
Yeah.
And because I think that's the easiest place in the world to hang out.
Yeah.
But it's also the most destructive. And so you almost have to say, how am I going to pull myself out of this pit of woe is me? And how you do that is you change your focus. And I love Hebrews 12, fix your eyes on Jesus, the author of perfecter in your faith. So I'm not talking about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. What I'm talking about is a change in focus. And that's where recounting your blessings, that's actually what you're doing is you're shifting where you're looking. And I love, we did this during worship yesterday when Jeff read Psalm 95 and then he talked about the awe of who God is and then how God is our shepherd. That's what, we come into worship, we live our lives. We're in the office on a Wednesday afternoon, we're at home and once again, our kid has disobeyed us for the 113th time, or you're trying to get them to bed and they're thirsty, shockingly, they're dehydrated. But just really saying God, I want to put my focus on you because we are so self-consumed, and yet God is always holding out this invitation that we are at our best when our focus is on Christ. That has to be the spiritual discipline. How can we make everything about Jesus, dying to ourselves, serving and loving other people? That's really the path to happiness that Jesus has laid out for us. So counterintuitive, but when we find that road and we walk that road, there is joy and peace and fulfillment and gratitude and fun.
Yeah. I wonder how many people were counting the blessing of this podcast being off last week.
Yes, I got probably 100 emails of people telling us thank you. No, I'm kidding.
Well, this has been another episode of The Second Look. You can catch this sermon and much more at our website, cometoconnect.com. Have a great week.